It had been a few years since we had exchanged more than a few words, most of them about mundane tasks or the children. Our connection had withered away slowly, like an old house that had once been full of laughter, but now echoed only with the sounds of silence and distant memories. I had tried to remember when it all started to slip away, but the truth was it had been a gradual process. A comment here, a moment of indifference there. It was as though our lives had fallen into separate routines, and somehow we both had just accepted it. I had always thought that love, real love, was something that needed to be nurtured, cared for, and kept alive. But after all these years, I started to wonder if I had been fooling myself. We were two strangers living in the same house, sharing the same responsibilities, but not the same bond. I used to think that time would heal the cracks in our marriage, that the rough patches were just phases we could overcome. But with each passing day, I felt less and less connected to the man I had married. It wasn't just the physical distance that had grown between us, though that was the most obvious. It was the emotional distance, the feeling that we were both living separate lives. He would come home late, often staying in his study long after dinner. I would wake up to an empty bed, finding him already gone before I could even get up. Our conversations had become strained, and even when we did talk, it felt like we were speaking different languages. And then one night, it all changed. We were sitting at the dinner table, just the two of us. The kids were at a sleepover, and for the first time in months, we found ourselves alone. I didn't expect much, just a quiet meal, maybe a bit of small talk. But then, as I was reaching for the salt, he said it. "I think I want a child." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unexpected. I froze, my hand still gripping the salt shaker. I looked at him, trying to gauge if he was joking, but his face was serious, his eyes fixed on mine. "A child?" I repeated, unable to hide the confusion in my voice. "Yes," he said, his tone calm, as if this was a perfectly normal thing to say. "I think it's time." I blinked, my mind racing. Time for what? Time for a child? After all these years? After everything we'd been through? I didn't know what to think. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted, and suddenly I was on unfamiliar terrain. "I thought we—" I trailed off, unsure of how to phrase it. The years of trying to revive something that had died between us felt like a long, painful battle. And now here he was, suggesting we bring a new life into the mix. It felt like a cruel joke. "I know it might sound strange," he said, his voice softening, "but I think we've both been distracted. Maybe it's time to start over, you know? Maybe a child could change things." I sat back in my chair, staring at him, feeling a strange mix of emotions, disbelief, confusion, and something darker: fear. I had never expected this. I had always imagined a future with him, but it was always a future of quiet understanding, of shared history. We were growing older, not younger. Children were not part of the equation anymore, or so I had thought. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why, after all this time?" He shrugged, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know. Maybe it's just the right moment." I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. His words felt like a bombshell, dropping into my lap with no warning. And just as quickly, I felt the walls of our quiet life begin to crumble around us. The silence that followed his admission was thick with unspoken words, feelings I couldn't even begin to untangle. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to understand why he thought this was the solution to everything that had gone wrong. But instead, I sat there, feeling an emptiness settle in my chest. Something inside me told me that his sudden desire for a child wasn't the answer to our problems. It was just another way for him to distract himself from the truth. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake off. There was something behind his words, something I couldn't see, but I could feel it. I had always known when something wasn't right, when a situation didn't add up. And now, as I looked at him across the table, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been hiding from the truth. He wasn't asking for a child because he wanted to fix our marriage. No, this was about something else, something I wasn't yet ready to face. The days following that conversation were a blur. I couldn't seem to escape the feeling that something was off, that I was missing something crucial. His words echoed in my mind. Maybe a child could change things. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how impossible that was. Children didn't fix broken relationships. They added layers of complexity, challenges, and responsibilities. That much I knew. I tried to continue with my daily routine, taking care of the house, managing the kids, handling all the small details that made up my world. But it was harder now. The unease I felt after our dinner conversation followed me everywhere. It lingered in the corners of my mind, in the space between the sentences we no longer exchanged, in the silence that now stretched longer than it ever had before. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself what had gone wrong. I had always prided myself on being perceptive, on noticing when something wasn't quite right. And now, I was sure something was very wrong. But the question was, what exactly was it? In the past, when we'd hit rough patches, we'd talked. We'd worked things out, even if it wasn't easy. But this time felt different. His sudden desire for a child, it didn't make sense. It felt like a band-aid on a much deeper wound. I started paying more attention to his actions, the subtle things he did when he thought I wasn't watching. He seemed more distant than ever, not just emotionally, but physically. He would come home later than usual, sometimes with a vague excuse about work, sometimes with nothing at all. There were moments when I could feel his presence in the house, but it was as if he was no longer really there. I had always trusted him, or at least I used to. But now doubt crept into my mind. The man I had once known, the man I had shared so much with, was slipping away from me, and I couldn't reach him. One afternoon, as I was sorting through the mail, something caught my eye. It was a letter, but not one I recognized. The handwriting was unfamiliar, a neat, slanted script I had never seen before. I picked it up cautiously, my heart beating a little faster. I opened it slowly, dreading what I might find. And when I read the words inside, my world shifted. The letter was from a woman. Her name was Emma, and she was his secretary. She thanked him for a recent meeting and mentioned how much she enjoyed working with him, expressing her admiration for his dedication and leadership. It was a polite, almost professional letter, but there was an undertone I couldn't ignore. There were too many words about how she admired him, how grateful she was for the opportunity to work alongside him, and how she looked forward to future projects. I could see the subtext. She liked him. She was interested in him. I set the letter down on the kitchen counter, my hands shaking slightly. A sense of dread filled me as the pieces began to fall into place. The late nights at the office, the emotional distance, the sudden decision to have a child, it was all connected. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew deep down that I had to face the truth. There was someone else. I couldn't remember the last time we had really talked, truly connected. But I couldn't keep ignoring the obvious anymore. And as much as I wanted to bury my head in the sand and pretend that everything was fine, I couldn't do it anymore. This wasn't just about a child. This was about something much bigger, something that had been quietly building for months, maybe even years. A betrayal that had been growing in the shadows, out of sight but always there, waiting to be uncovered. I didn't know how I was going to confront him. I didn't know if I even could. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this go. Not without answers. And so, as the weight of what I had uncovered settled heavily on my chest, I found myself standing at the crossroads of my marriage, unsure of which way to turn. The life I had built with him, the one I had always trusted, was crumbling before my eyes, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. But one thing was certain. No matter what happened, I wasn't going to stay in the dark any longer. I'll take a short pause. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and if you've ever gone through something similar. I'd love to read your stories, and if you'd like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe. I'm continuing now. The days following my discovery were a blur, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to confront him. I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Every time I saw him, a cold knot formed in my stomach, and the lie we were living became more unbearable. My thoughts were like a whirlwind, each passing moment filled with questions, doubts, and fears. How had things gotten this far? I spent nights planning the confrontation in my mind, wondering what I would say, how I would act. Part of me was terrified, afraid that the truth would break everything irreparably. Another part of me was furious, furious at him for making me feel invisible, for letting something so serious and destructive go on without my knowledge. And yet, through it all, there was a deep sense of sadness, because I knew that things would never be the same again, no matter how the conversation went. It was a Friday evening when he came home later than usual. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock in the living room. I had been pacing for hours, gathering the courage to speak the words that had been lodged in my throat for so long. My heart raced as I heard his car pull into the driveway. This was it, the moment of truth. He walked in, his face lighting up with that familiar smile, the one that used to reassure me, the one that used to make everything feel okay. But now that smile felt like a lie. He seemed surprised to find me still awake, sitting in the living room waiting for him. "Hey," he said, his voice warm but tinged with that distant undertone I had started to recognize. "You're still up?" I stood up slowly, my hands trembling slightly. I had rehearsed this moment over and over in my head, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure if I was ready. The letter I had found, still tucked away in my purse, seemed to burn a hole in my mind. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady but firm. I wasn't sure if I could keep it together for much longer, but I had to try. He paused, sensing the shift in the air, the tension that had suddenly enveloped the room. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping closer. But I could see it in his eyes. He already knew. He could feel it too. "I found something," I said, holding my breath. "A letter. From your secretary." His expression faltered for just a moment, the smallest shift that betrayed his calm demeanor. "What letter?" he asked, but his voice lacked the usual conviction. It sounded rehearsed, defensive. I didn't wait for him to deny it. I pulled the letter from my purse and handed it to him, my hands now fully trembling. His gaze flickered over the paper, and I saw the color drain from his face. His jaw tightened as he read the words, and I could feel his unease growing. "What is this, David?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is going on?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. He simply stood there, holding the letter, his mind clearly racing. I could see the internal battle in his eyes, the struggle between telling me the truth and maintaining the lie he had been living. I can explain," he stammered. But his words sounded hollow. I could tell he wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to face the reality of what was happening. "Explain what, David?" I asked, a wave of emotion rising in my chest. "That you've been seeing her? That you've been lying to me for God knows how long?" His gaze dropped to the floor. He didn't speak at first, and in that silence, I knew everything I needed to know. The truth was staring me in the face. "It's not what you think," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "We've been talking a lot lately. She's just a colleague. Nothing more." I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. "David, I'm not stupid. This isn't just about work. I've seen how you've been acting, how distant you've become, and now I find this letter and you still expect me to believe you? I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice low. "It was just easy." She understood me. And I was confused. "I don't know what happened." I looked at him, my heart heavy with disappointment. "You don't know what happened. You don't know that you've been emotionally distant for months? You don't know that I've been begging for your attention, for your love, and all you've been doing is pulling away?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't let him. I couldn't. "You've been lying to me, David," I said, the anger and hurt bubbling to the surface. "You've been choosing her over me, and now you expect me to just let it go?" "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "I never meant for this to happen." "Well, it has happened," I replied, my voice sharp now. "And I have to decide what I'm going to do next. But this isn't something I can just forgive and forget." His eyes searched mine, and I saw the regret there. But it was too late for apologies, too late for empty words. The damage had been done, and I could no longer ignore it. I turned away from him, not wanting him to see the tears threatening to fall. I wasn't ready to cry in front of him, not yet. I needed time. I needed space. And most of all, I needed to figure out who I was in this new reality without him by my side. The days after the confrontation felt like a blur, each one blending into the next, as though time itself had lost its meaning. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, the moment when I finally confronted him and the coldness that had followed. It wasn't just the words that stung, it was the silence, the weight of everything unspoken between us. His empty apologies, his attempts to explain himself, only made it worse. How could I trust him again? How could I believe anything he said after everything he'd hidden from me? I tried to focus on other things, on work, on the small comforts I still had, but it felt as though my world had tilted off its axis. The house felt different now, quieter. The walls that had once been filled with the sounds of our laughter, the gentle hum of daily life now felt suffocating, full of tension. I couldn't escape the feeling that something had irrevocably changed. One evening, after another strained dinner where the only conversation was about the weather, I found myself staring out of the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It was a clear night, but there was a heaviness in the air, like the calm before a storm. I could feel the storm inside of me, the storm of emotions I had been trying to keep at bay. I was angry, yes, but there was something else. A deep, aching sadness that seemed to take root in my chest, growing every day, slowly consuming me. I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living like this, caught between the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. I couldn't pretend anymore. The love I had for him, the trust, the security, had all been shattered. And no matter how much I wanted things to go back to the way they were, I knew that was impossible. It wasn't just his actions. It was the way I had allowed myself to ignore the warning signs, the way I had ignored my own needs and desires for so long. I had let myself be swallowed by his world, and now I was left trying to find myself again in the wreckage. He came home late that night again, and I could hear the soft click of the door as he entered. The house was dark except for the dim light of the kitchen, where I sat, staring at the empty cup in front of me. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I knew that I wasn't ready to face him yet. He hesitated when he saw me, his eyes searching for a sign of what I was thinking, but I kept my gaze steady. I wasn't going to make it easy for him anymore. I wasn't going to play the part of the understanding wife who would forgive everything just because he said the right things. He had crossed a line, and I had crossed one too. He walked toward the kitchen slowly, his movements almost tentative, as if he were afraid of what might happen next. I could feel his uncertainty, but it didn't make me feel any less angry. It didn't make me feel any less hurt. "I've been thinking about what you said," he started, his voice quiet. "And I know I messed up. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm willing to try if you'll let me." I looked at him, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, to believe that this could be fixed. But that part of me was small now, almost drowned out by the louder voice that screamed at me to stand up for myself, to stop settling for less than I deserved. "You don't just fix this, David," I said, my voice steady but full of quiet power. "You don't just wake up one day and decide to make it all better. You've already made your choice, and I need to make mine." He stepped closer, as if to reach for me, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "No, you don't get to decide that anymore. I'm the one who gets to decide what happens next." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "You don't get to fix this by showing up late every night or throwing around empty promises. You don't get to fix this by offering me apologies after everything you've done." His face fell, the guilt in his eyes unmistakable, but there was something more in the way he looked at me, something deeper, almost desperate. "I don't want to lose you," he said softly. "I love you. I've always loved you." The words hung in the air between us, and for a brief moment I almost wanted to believe him. But the truth was, love wasn't enough anymore. Love didn't erase the hurt. Love didn't undo the betrayal. It was like a piece of glass, shattered beyond repair. No matter how much you wanted to put it back together, it would never be the same. I took a deep breath, looking away from him as the weight of the decision pressed down on me. "I can't do this anymore, David. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I need to find out who I am again, without you." He didn't say anything at first. The silence between us grew thick and suffocating. I could feel the distance between us, a gap that had widened beyond repair. He didn't reach for me again. Instead, he just stood there, defeated, as if he already knew that he had lost me. "I'm sorry," he said again, but this time it felt like just words, not a solution. "I know," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. But sorry isn't enough anymore. And just like that, the chapter closed on our marriage. We were two strangers in the same house, unable to bridge the gap that had formed between us. I had made my choice, and though it felt terrifying, it also felt like the beginning of something new, something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to stay in the past anymore. I'll take a short pause. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and if you've ever gone through something similar. I'd love to read your stories. And if you'd like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe. I'm continuing now. The days that followed were a blur of finality. The decision had been made, and while the weight of it hung heavy in the air, there was also a strange sense of relief. It was as if a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. Every part of me had screamed for something more, for something real. And now, as painful as it was, I had taken the first step toward finding it. David moved out a week later. He didn't argue, didn't try to change my mind. He simply packed his things in silence, the air between us thick with words unsaid. His eyes, once full of pleading and regret, were now empty. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask if there was any chance of reconciliation. He just left. That night, I sat in the house that had once been our home, the place where we had built a life together, now so strangely empty without him. I stared out the window, watching the shadows stretch across the room as the sun began to set. For a moment, I couldn't believe it was over. I had spent so many years working to make things work, to patch up the cracks, to fix what was broken. But now, I saw clearly that it had been beyond repair for a long time. The next few weeks were a process of rediscovery. I didn't jump into anything new. I didn't look for distractions to fill the void. Instead, I gave myself permission to feel everything: the anger, the hurt, the sadness, but also the relief, the hope, and even the excitement of what might come next. I spent time with friends, ones I had neglected over the years, and reconnected with parts of myself that had been lost in the haze of my marriage. One evening, a month after David had left, I found myself walking through the city just for the sake of walking. The air was cool, the streets quieter than usual, and I felt a sense of peace in the solitude. As I walked, I realized how much I had missed this feeling of being alone but not lonely, of being whole without anyone else. It was a freedom I hadn't known in so long. I found a small cafe and sat by the window, the sound of the coffee machine and the low murmur of conversations filling the space around me. I ordered my drink and sipped it slowly, savoring the warmth that spread through me. As I sat there, I thought about everything that had led me to this point: the years of sacrifice, the mistakes, the lessons learned, and the choices that had brought me here. I didn't regret any of it. I had spent so many years holding on to a version of myself that was defined by someone else's expectations. But now, I had a chance to rewrite the narrative. I had the power to choose my own path, to decide who I wanted to be, and I wasn't going to waste it. A man sat down at the table next to mine, his presence unremarkable, and yet in that moment, I found myself wondering what the future might hold. Not just with him, but with anyone. The idea of starting fresh, of opening my heart again, felt both exciting and terrifying. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had learned that I was enough on my own, that I didn't need anyone to complete me. That, in fact, I was already whole. The door to the cafe swung open, and a rush of cold air swept in, carrying the scent of rain. It was the beginning of a new season, and I was ready for it, for whatever it might bring. I finished my drink, paid the bill, and walked out into the night, no longer burdened by the past, but walking forward into a future that was entirely mine to shape. And as I walked away, I realized that the most important thing I had learned through all of this wasn't how to forgive, or how to let go, or even how to move on. It was simply this: I had learned how to love myself again.